Hey, it's Greg. This is the Square Pizza Pod, cooked up by Shermco. Cool. Alejandro, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, man. Thanks very much for joining the Square Pizza Pod. It's been a long time coming, but glad we could make it happen.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And where are you coming from today?
I am reporting live from California, the Bay Area.
California. How are things looking out in California?
Things are lovely. We had a rainy winter, but can't complain. We needed it, and now sun is shining, birds are chirping. I'm pretty excited about it.
What more could you want? We just had recently Lakeisha Young from Oakland Reach on the podcast. So we're doing a little West Coast swing now.
Yeah. I just caught up with her at a conference in San Diego.
Great. So you guys are connected and know about each other.
Yeah.
She's doing incredible work, very much like you and Springboard.
I'm a fan. Although it's funny that we had to go all the way down to San Diego to catch up when we live like 10 minutes away from each other.
Yeah, sometimes that happens. Excited to host you, to share more about you and the incredible work you've done and the team at Springboard. But curious, even before we start that, I would love to just start with some positive news. Anything great happening the first kind of quarter of 2023 you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, a couple of things that I'm excited about. So we are growing our partnership with Baltimore City Schools in a big way. A 2-year contract that's a high watermark for us, and it'll enable us to serve most of the schools in the district. So super stoked about that. And then the other one that's top of mind is that the Massachusetts Department of Education commissioned an external evaluation, realizing that they, like everyone, spent a ton of ESSER funding on initiatives, interventions, tutoring, and they kind of wanted to know what's working. As the well runs dry, you got to look at everything with a critical eye.
Yep.
And the evaluator found that Springboard is, their words, by far the most cost-effective tutoring model worth scaling, which for us is just affirming that the external evidence validates our own evidence base. And it's also timely, kind of at a moment where districts are wondering, what do I keep? What do I grow? And what do I need to scale back?
I mean, that's incredible. Congrats. I'm assuming it feels good as the leader of the org, knowing those moments can be a little anxious, but any other words you want to share besides just that it feels good, given that positive feedback from evaluators?
Just that the thing about the program that we run in Massachusetts, it's our newer, kind of lighter touch, lower cost, train the trainer version of what we do versus like the tried and true intensive version of our program that we've done for 10 years. So always a bit of a nail biter when you're evaluating something that's new versus the thing that you've done for quite a long time. And breathed a sigh of relief to see the findings.
And that's the FELA model you're talking about?
So great question. The FELA model is that's our core methodology. It powers everything that we do. But this particular program we call Springboard Learning Accelerator versus like our flagship intervention, which is the more we'll run it for you. SLA is more like we'll coach you as you self-manage the intervention.
And the accelerator, there was demand for like a lower cost model, and I guess helps you guys probably grow too. Is that part of what allowed you guys to launch that?
Yeah. So the whole idea was to make the transition from a direct to widespread impact. Direct impact being like we're the ones that deliver our own intervention. Widespread impact is how do you enable districts to self-manage the intervention. It's more independent, it's more affordable, and therefore it's more scalable. So that's what we're betting on in order to scale our impact from tens of thousands of kids to hundreds of thousands of kids served annually. And districts have greater ownership kind of when they're primarily implementing versus outsourcing that to another provider.
It's exciting times.
Yeah. We're also expecting that, like, at the beginning of the pandemic, when budgets were kind of frozen, the pendulum swung all the way toward the lower cost intervention. Then federal funding arrived, and the pendulum swung all the way toward the more intensive and expensive version of what we do. And as federal funding winds down over the course of the next couple of years, we expect to see more of a balance, but it's helpful to be able to kind of have multiple price points and kind of roll with the times.
That's great. Yeah, and definitely want to get more to kind of Springboard and the great work. But even before, want to focus and highlight you. And so, so much of the work that we admire from afar from Springboard is focused on parents and kind of breaking down these silos, I think, right, between teaching and learning and family engagement. Mm-hmm. But from learning more about you from our research, seems like it's pretty personal from your own lived experience with your parents having, coming from Chile and Puerto Rico, and then the work you've done currently. So curious if you can share more about kind of the origin story with your parents and how that lived experience led you to Springboard.
Yeah, totally. You're right that my work kind of stems out of my lived experience. I'm half Chilean, half Puerto Rican. My parents escaped political persecution in 1973. My dad wrote a play in Chile in protest of the dictator Pinochet. And as you might imagine, Pinochet was less than amused. He was a political prisoner for a few years, lucky to make it out alive. My sister and I were born at kind of theater festivals along the way, lived in Puerto Rico. And then my family made the decision to immigrate to the US so their kids could have better educational opportunities. Didn't take long in Carrollton, Georgia, for my parents to realize that schools serving poor families like ours rarely live up to America's promise. So hard pivot, we moved to New Jersey, rented the cheapest house in a community with a highly rated public school. And my parents figured that's going to be the ticket for our kids. But it wasn't. My sister and I excelled in spite of the school community, not because of it. My teachers only ever treated my parents as pushy immigrants that didn't belong in the school community. My classmates treated my sister and me the same way. And the system put hurdle after hurdle in front of my family. Even my high school guidance counselor sat me down, tried to talk me out of applying to Harvard, telling me to avoid the disappointment of rejection, even though I was the valedictorian. And later that year, she seemed disappointed to see my acceptance letter. So I share all that because my parents were the only caring adults who were consistently in my corner and in my sister's. They saw the fullest version of our potential, and they helped us to realize it by setting and achieving one goal after the next. But the school system never saw the value in them, and that was a formative experience, as you'd imagine, that I carried with me into the classroom. Became first grade teacher in North Philly, Puerto Rican neighborhood. I see myself in my kids. I see my parents and their parents. And I get frustrated that our system is still approaching parents as liabilities rather than as assets.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And, I know we have the Teach for America experience in common as well. And then that fast forwards you to Springboard. So for the people that don't know, please give, listening audience a little bit of an overview about what you guys do on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, I founded Springboard 10 years ago now with the vision of closing the literacy gap by bridging the gap between home and school. What that looks like is that we run programs, typically in summer and after school, that coach parents and teachers to team up and help their kids reach learning goals. So what it ends up, the reach that we've ended up growing to is we're serving about 30,000 kids a year in 60 cities around the country. Kids end up making 3 to 4 months of reading growth during each short 5 to 10 week program. That closes the gap to grade level reading performance by half in such a short period of time. And the secret sauce is being able to equip families to support learning at home. So through our programs, we do a weekly workshop where teachers show families, here's how you can support your child's learning at home, and parents going to share their insights and observations back with teachers. That is the force multiplier, right? For in districts that can struggle to get 20% of parents to show up at report card conferences, we get 88% of parents to attend that weekly workshop, learn how to be a one-on-one reading coach for their kid at home. For every hour that a teacher leads a workshop, parents deliver 25 hours of one-on-one tutoring at home, and almost inevitably kids start to accelerate their progress.
No small feat, all the great work you're doing. I know, maybe some naysayers would say schools have, maybe the best ones have tried to work with families or like parent engagement stuff, right, has been around since forever. What have you guys found that has allowed it to be so successful in the Springboard model?
Yeah, great question. And we've done a lot of learning, as you can imagine, and we feel like we've cracked the code on how to get parents and teachers to work together. And we call the methodology that we use Family Educator Learning Accelerators, FELAs for short. They're 5 to 10 week cycles during which parents and teachers team up to help kids reach a learning goal. And they've got these 6 basic steps, none of which are rocket science, but in combination, they're really powerful. So the first is to build relational trust. If you don't have a bit of trust between educators and families, then the thing is over before it even started. But even a 15 or 20-minute conversation can be enough to get the process started and is really predictive of whether or not the families engage in the rest of the cycle. So that's step 1. Step 2, parents and teachers need to look at the same information. Otherwise, you get this insane data asymmetry where 9 in 10 parents in the country think their kid is performing on grade level. Only 1 in 4 kids actually are meeting that standard. And you've got to flatten that out. And that enables you to set a growth goal in step 3. And the goal is like the keystone that holds the whole thing together. And we've learned the hard way that goal's got to be winnable within 5 to 10 weeks. Fewer than 5, and it's not long enough to produce a habit. Longer than 10, and the finish line is just so far away that it's hard to motivate behavior change. So once you've got your goal, then it's off to the races. Practice, practice, practice is step 4. Kids are practicing with their educators in the classroom. Can be in person, can be virtual, can be a teacher, can be a tutor. Kids are also practicing with their families at home, and we built an app that helps guide that effort so that even a family that may not themselves be a reader can still be an effective reading tutor to their child at home, 15 minutes a day. And then the whole team, families and educators together, need to get together to practice through that weekly workshop that I mentioned. And that is what kind of unlocks an enormous amount of instructional time at home. At the end of all that practice time, 5 to 10 weeks later, step 5, you measure progress, see how kids did relative to the goal. And the very final step is to celebrate together, punctuating the experience with a quick win. That's what crystallizes the lasting habit, both for the teachers for whom the light bulb goes off. Like, parents are the co-teachers I never knew that I had. They're the tutors hiding in plain sight. This job isn't as daunting and isolating as I've experienced it to be. And you don't put that mindset back in the box. And then on the parent side, the experience of like setting and achieving a goal with your kid, especially for families that just haven't often enough had that experience, that's a powerful one. And even 6 months after one of these short cycles is over, parents are still coaching their kids in reading for 22 more minutes per night than before the intervention ever happened. Last thing I'll say is our recommendation to districts is to do 3 of these cycles over the course of a year, a 5-week learning accelerator during the summer to prevent a loss and instead create a gain, a 10-week learning accelerator in the fall once teachers have identified, like, here are the kids that most need a boost, and then another 10-week cycle in the spring as a sprint through the finish.
And I love, as comprehensive as that is, you started with trust. And I think what we've seen from our own family empowerment work at Shermco, which is how we learned about you guys, is that, the families and many families, for rightful reasons, may be hesitant to trust schools, even because of their own experience that they've had growing up and what they've seen of not really being delivered, or maybe just a negative mindset or perception towards those families, similar to what you lifted up. But when schools are able to bridge that trust, it unlocks so many wonderful opportunities with the families in the school and the community. I know it's not a silver bullet, but curious how you guys go about building that trust to allow everything else to be so successful.
Yeah, it's a great question and a timely one, right? Because I think trust was ruptured during school closures, and a lot of parents, just as districts had an awakening around the critical role that parents play in their kids' learning, parents too had an awakening about their children's education, and lots of folks weren't happy with what they saw. They came into greater voice, came into greater power, but those relationships have in a lot of places become quite contentious, and there's a real need to rebuild and restore trust. Otherwise, families will keep heading for the exits, and declining enrollment will kind of present an existential threat. So it's a timely one. And
Yep.
in a perfect world, you build trust over a long period of time. In the less than perfect world we live in, the question is how quickly can you build enough trust to get people to start working together? And at least what we've seen is that it's more quickly than you might think. So that while we'd love for every educator in a Springboard program to do like a 40-minute long home visit at the beginning of each program cycle, that's kind of like the gold standard. Even a 15-minute phone call is still predictive of whether or not a family is going to show up at that first workshop.
Mm-hmm. And just that one small 15-minute outreach, right? Like how much of a difference that can make. It's like teaching my first year teaching, one of my veteran teachers was like, call every student's family the first 2 weeks of school. Just introduce yourself and say hello, which isn't rocket science, right? But just having that conversation with the family. So if you do have to call back again 2 weeks later because Johnny got an A on the test or Johnny threw a chair across the room, there's at least some sort of common ground to, and a little bit of trust to pick up from with that particular parent.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And, I think it stems maybe a little bit and connects the school closure around learning recovery. And I think you guys continue to do some really amazing work around that. I know you spoke about it a moment ago, but can you go deeper on how you're helping families think about learning recovery post-COVID?
Yeah, it's such a critical need because we are aware, right, of that. I won't reiterate it, but we're aware of the extent to which the pandemic had a disproportionate impact on marginalized learners. The way that I think about it is that there's only one way to try to address learning recovery, broadly speaking. There's a zillion kind of tactics, but there's only one path, which is to increase instructional time. You have to ramp up instructional time. If you lost instructional time, you need to ramp up instructional time. You can try to do that like a bunch of different ways, right? Like, do we hire a fleet of like college students turn tutors? Do we kind of use robo tutors and like AI kind of powered interventions to increase instructional time? Do we extend the school day? Do we extend the school year? Like there's 100 variations on the theme, and yet there's a single theme. There's no way around it. You got to ramp up instructional time. The challenge that school systems are having is that they've got fewer and fewer teachers on payroll with which to ramp up instructional time, as teachers experienced an enormous amount of overwhelm during the pandemic, and lots of folks decided that this job is not sustainable, it's not winnable, and therefore let me find another one. So that how are you going to ramp up instructional time without the people that you look first to when it comes to instructional time? And your federal funding is soon to run out. So like that $1,000 kid tutoring intervention was sure great while it lasted, but how am I going to pay for that over the long run? The way that I see it, engaging families in learning at home and in supporting instructional time at home, it's the only scalable, cost-effective, and culturally responsive approach to ramping up instructional time that I can see. And it's that opportunity lays dormant in most school communities across the country. In most places, kind of parents and teachers are working in parallel, in isolation, rather than working together to support instruction across the continuum of home and school. The reality is that kids only spend 13% of their waking hours inside the classroom. So if you're not trying to capture instructional time in the enormity of children's time spent at home, then in a lot of ways you're fighting a losing battle. And our work is to try to unlock parent teaching potential and have that be a critical lever to accelerate learning recovery.
And you mentioned AI a little bit, and there's obviously a variety of AI platforms and tools kind of being launched and tested right now. Anything you are seeing that's intriguing to you or interesting as you think about bridging this gap between school and families?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about it, and what I'm mostly seeing is a lot of energy around the idea of co-pilots, like your AI assistant to help you do like virtually everything, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a zillion startups that are each trying to pick like some human activity and how do I create your little AI helper. I get, and I think that's going to become commoditized super quickly, right? Like I think I'm more interested in the question of how can AI facilitate person-to-person collaboration versus just person to technology collaboration. And I'll make it more concrete. So like
Yeah.
I was doing a focus group with teachers, and there was a teacher who had done Springboard programs for like 4 years who said, here's how I took everything I learned from your program and changed my practice as a teacher. Here's what I do. At the end of every assessment period, I take the most recent reading score, math score, like SEL, and I write up a blurb for each family so they know like what the hell does that actually mean? Like, is my kid on track? What are their strengths and challenges? What's the one thing I can do at home to support their learning? I set a goal for every kid because I learned at Springboard that the goal is the thing that makes us a team. And I know it's got to be achievable within 10 weeks, for all the reasons that we talked about that. And then I go find resources that are going to help each family guide their child toward the goal. I share all that in advance of the parent-teacher conference. So by the time we sit down, it's super tactical. Like, are we clear on the goal? Let's practice a strategy you can use at home. And the parent leaves that conference feeling clear and confident on about what they can do tonight, tomorrow, and next week to help their child reach that goal. And then it's off to the races. The parents are using the strategies at home on a daily basis. The teacher's checking in, maybe sending some additional resources, some nudges, answering questions. And by the time the next parent-teacher conference rolls around, they celebrate the progress they made on the last goal and rinse, repeat, set the new one. It's kind of all the things that drive impact within our programs, but just like fundamentally now a part of that teacher's craft. And it's quite labor intensive. So the power that I see in AI is that everything that teacher did outside of like the relational conversation at the parent-teacher conference with the family could and arguably should be automated. We can build tech that takes a classroom-based assessment and translates it into a family-friendly score report. You can do that multimodally. Do you want to watch a 2-minute personalized video on how your kid is doing as a reader? Do you want to see it graphically? Do you want to see it in narrative form? In what language? Would you rather hear it? All of that can be facilitated by AI without requiring human effort. The goal setting should be automated. The content curation, no one, neither teachers nor families, should be hunting and pecking for the right resource at the right time to help their kid reach the goal. And AI is well suited to personalize that content based on the learning needs and interests of each kid. And even like the ongoing back and forth where like at the end of the day, a teacher might see like, I just got 7 questions from families and I love that they're engaged, but now I got to answer them. Like you can imagine leveraging generative AI to tee up 7 very thoughtful and insightful responses to those questions in the voice of the teacher that they need only glance at and edit it if the spirit moves them. Otherwise, kind of send it right back to the family. So I think we can take all the friction out of the process so that family engagement becomes a time saver for educators rather than an incremental effort. I think there's a ton of potential there, so much so that Springboard is spinning off an ed tech company called Paloma that will build that tool and bring that potential to life.
Yeah, can you share more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's early days. We went through the process of, and it's a legal process of you want to dot your I's and cross your T's to be able to establish kind of the independent entity, and we're now creating the relationships between Springboard and Paloma, things like licensing agreements and revenue sharing agreements. But Paloma itself, it will be kind of an independent entity, a public benefit corporation, so that we can attract the tech talent and capital we need to bring the fullest version of that vision to life without distracting the nonprofit from kind of focusing on our programmatic work. So we're trying to optimize for how do we keep the nonprofit kind of focused on the strategic plan that we just launched, and how do we enable the startup to be as nimble and autonomous as it needs to be. And then what are the synergies that we can create between those two entities, given that they share the same vision, right? The shared vision is that we want parent-teacher collaboration to become standard practice in the education system, right? For Springboard and Paloma having existed, we want to get to the day when people don't even remember the dark ages when parents and teachers had to work in isolation rather than work together to support student learning. And I'm really excited about the synergies between kind of the two entities in bringing that vision to life.
Yeah. Any sneak peek on like when that tech platform might be live for those interested in checking it out?
Yeah, so it's all moving. We are incorporating the entity like imminently, assembling the co-founding team, and there's some superstars that I'll be excited to introduce shortly. And then getting to building, prototyping and piloting this summer, and having kind of thinking of it as a minimum lovable product, more so than a minimum viable product by the fall of next year.
It's exciting.
I'm stoked about it. Yeah, we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
And kind of speaking of that, and excitement, the results are really incredible on the website and others that we've seen, but also just the scale, right, of how fast you guys have grown, being 10 years old and growing across the country. From other leaders out there, in the education startup space and nonprofit space, as you think about scale, what have you learned and what advice would you give to others thinking about scaling any current operations they have?
Yeah, it's such a good one. I think having clarity on like the core methodology, what exactly is it that drives impact within our work? That's like foundational, because if you're clear on the core, then you can more easily weigh the trade-offs as you scale without risking diluting your impact. So in our own journey, when we kind of had just the one way that we worked, the intensive program that we ran ourselves, from the get-go, we challenged ourselves to build it for scale. So we worked with different kinds of partners. We challenged ourselves to work in different geographies to make sure that what we were building and learning could be universalized rather than just kind of pigeonholing ourselves early on. And then we got to a place where the thing was humming along. We were growing at 90% year over year for the first 6 years of Springboard's life, and we could have continued that for a while. Eventually, though, it would become the logarithmic growth curve that any intensive service is fated to. So before that happened, we deliberately disrupted our own model. We set a goal that was unachievable with our program model in order to force ourselves to innovate and find a way to reach a new order of magnitude of scale, right? What got us here won't get us there. So let's be kind of the forcing function. And luckily we did that before a pandemic that would have been the forcing function anyway. So we had like a couple of steps ahead of what was a disruption none of us could have predicted. But that's how we kind of made the leap toward widespread impact, the train the trainer model. And we went through a process where we disassembled the Lego castle, like spread out all of the little pieces. There ended up being like 217 components of our program, and for every single one, we labeled it critical exact. You need to do this and do it our way. Critical flexible. You need to do this, do it your own way. And non-critical, like take it or leave it. The thing's still going to work. And that's how we systematically removed cost and complexity and built something that someone else could implement rather than something that only we could implement. And we're betting that'll take us from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of kids served annually. And the next frontier in that is going further down the road. Now, how do we build the technology kind of within Paloma that makes it that much more frictionless and that much more kind of self-service so that we can reach millions of kids and tens of millions of kids. But the core methodology, having clarity on like the FELA method and that 6-step process, that's the guiding light. And it's why we haven't had a trade-off in impact. From direct to widespread, we removed more than half of the cost of the original program, and the outcomes are every bit as strong. We would have been okay with a trade-off. Like I can sleep at night if we can, at a third of the cost, make 2/3 of the impact. I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. But we haven't had to make it yet because of just being really clear and intentional about the method.
Yeah, I love that clarity. And also, pushing you a little bit here with all the results you guys have had, the scale. I know it hasn't been easy, nor probably is everything perfect, but let me know if it is. But what's something you guys are working on, or maybe that you're not great at, that you want to get better as you guys continue to grow the work?
Yeah, performance culture. Performance culture is like our biggest area of focus right now, especially at, shall I say, two things. Focus itself, that we transitioned as an organization from the startup phase where we put a premium on being nimble and being opportunistic, and that served us well for a while, and then it didn't. And as soon as we crossed like the threshold of having north of somewhere around 50 people, then there are all kinds of inefficiencies from that kind of approach. People aren't kind of rowing exactly synchronously, even if they're like directionally right. Like if all those paddles aren't hitting the water at the same time at the right angle, you're going to feel it in the boat, right? So one lesson learned for me the hard way was to reorient my skill set, but even more importantly, my value set to value focus and planning and clarity, and trying to do fewer things better versus trying to do more things. So that was like a challenge that was our primary focus over the course of the last 2 years ago and into early last year, just creating the strategic plan, the operational plan, and just clarity, focus. The next big challenge that we're kind of in the midst of is performance culture. Like Springboard's gone far with homegrown talent, being like a scrappy team of incredible people that have done incredible things, and we're all wearing shoes that are too big for us, and so and it's been the Achilles heel in our quarterly surveys, culture amp surveys that we do, is accountability. We're not having enough conversations around performance and accountability. So we reoriented our values. We named that, like, at Springboard, we deliver best in class work. And now we've got to do the hard work of defining that standard. And does everybody understand what best in class looks like, or does everyone share a standard in every corner of the organization? And do we have the processes in place to ensure that we're always orienting toward that standard? Some of those conversations are not easy ones, but it's what's required for the next phase of our development.
Yeah, I love that. We were just with a client earlier today, and we talked about how data creates clarity, either good or bad, but it creates clarity to understand, either as leaders, programmatic clarity around data or outcomes. So we know how to make adjustments, how to get better. But without that data, to your point, it's hard to have that clarity about knowing where to go or what to improve.
Yep. And by when, I think for us, we've had a bad habit, and I'll take accountability for it, of not often enough asking the by when. So like if we know something needs to improve, assigning it a date by which it must improve, and then creating accountability around that date. We weren't doing a good enough job of that, right? So something might, like, if something within our platform was a little glitchy, people would kind of get used to it, work around it, learn to live with it, and then that challenge becomes like just part of the scenery. So that we're trying to kind of dislodge that by being really clear on using the data to understand the challenges, to your point, but then assigning a timeline by which we'll make progress, working backwards from that timeline, and then kind of creating both support, autonomy, and accountability in equal measure.
Let's get you out here on a few semi-fun rapid fire questions. What's one thing the listening audience can do to support you or the work of Springboard?
Ooh, that's a good one. Depends on who's listening. I think if for
everybody listens to Square Pizza Pod. Everybody.
So all the more nuanced response I'll need to give. If you're a school or a district leader, reach out so that we can figure out if there's alignment between your needs and the work that Springboard does, or if you're connected with a school or district leader. Those are conversations we're always eager to have. If you are a funder, please fund us. Most of our budget's driven by by earned income, but we're not all the way. We're about 4 years shy of a break even, and that means we're leaning on support from philanthropists to be able to grow our work. And otherwise, like if you have ideas to contribute or kind of conversations to engage in, we're always eager to learn. We're always eager to share, and that's another way to engage.
On a personal side, what musical artists are you listening to right now?
I've been revisiting a lot of Mac Miller.
Mac Miller. Why is that?
Yeah. Because I like it. Should I have a more profound response? Because it bops and it's easy to listen to while I'm working. Not distracting, but it's energizing.
Mac Miller, perfect. Last question, Alejandro. What does Square Pizza remind you of?
It reminds me of Detroit. My wife actually just walked in from walking the dog. Her family's from Michigan, from Warren, right outside Detroit. And the very literal interpretation of your question is that Square Pizza reminds me of Detroit.
That's great. I'm heading to Michigan next week to see some friends.
Oh, cool.
Well, great. Thanks for taking time. Thanks for all the work at Springboard. We're rooting you guys on from afar, and appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks so much for checking out the Square Pizza Pod, making a few selfish requests. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps spread the word about the podcast, and share this with a friend. We appreciate it. Thanks.